you know, like the first 5 slides, just like last time.
Okay.
He has the first, and I have your notes, the notes are on it.
Yeah. Why did I put that?
Did you lay it down?
I laid it down. I'm asking about that picture. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Please, if you want to get something to drink, please do it now. We're going to start our meeting momentarily. My name is Tony Maldonado. I am chairman of the Hispanic Leaders Group, and I want to welcome the community leaders that are here tonight and other members of the HLG that are here tonight for our first live get-together since the pandemic. It's been almost 3 years since we were able to meet in a safe place like this. And I want to thank the St. Louis Community College Foundation for allowing us to be here tonight. And this, I guarantee this is going to be a very informative meeting for you. It's a short meeting. We'll be out of here by 8 o'clock, hopefully. But it was very informative. So please have a seat with your food and drink. And Mauricio, the IT, has a note for me.
I need to stop the music on the background.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, without music, I have zero rhythm. Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Yo soy Antonio Maldonado, presidente o el chairman de los líderes hispanos de San Luis. Bienvenidos a todos los líderes de la comunidad hispana de San Luis. Esta noche es la primera reunión que tenemos en vivo en casi 3 años. Casi 3 años. Vamos a tener una presentación como de 1 hora. Vamos a tener tiempo para hacer preguntas al final de la presentación y vamos a salir a las 8 de la noche. A menos que algo pase que estamos tan envueltos en el tema. So, without further ado, I'm going to do an introduction. Tonight, we have the honor of having a Missouri state official address our community, and we also have a federal official address our community. And this shows that if we have open dialogue, these things can happen. We can educate our community through these types of meetings that the Hispanic Leaders Group has done over the years. This is our educational part of our general membership meeting. For those that, 1 or 2 people that don't know our tradition, we have a tradition when we first start this meeting that each one of us gets a chance to stand up and say who we are and who we are representing tonight. Of course, there will be no speechifying, so you only have like 20 seconds each to do this. So, and I think that Dr. Warren and Director Davis will get a chance to actually hear your names and see who you are and who you're representing. And I like to address and say this to you guys. We are a very passionate community. You know, we hold a lot of passion for the things that we do. We are small in numbers in this area, but we are strong and we're united, and in unity comes our strength. So you know that with this group, some of the things that you teach us tonight is going to get back out into their individual memberships. So the impact is going to be greater than the numbers you see in this room. So I am going to start with somebody that's eating. No. Let's start from that end. From that end with the gentleman in the green shirt. Oh, he is. Okay. Cheese. Or should I say cheese? Go ahead and
The husband of Dinora.
the husband, yeah, and he's also our photographer and historian for many, 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 many years. Doña?
Marta Castellanos is one of the group. Board member of the Hispanic Leaders Group. Elena Peño, retired teacher, Spanish, Limber School District, and with Hispanic Leaders Group. Maria Stockley from Caritas, he said, a program for senior citizens.
Mauricio Gobo, Nestle Purina, but also a proud member of the HLG as a board member.
Suzanne Gobo with International Spouse Meetup Group, International Mentoring Program, and St. Louis Mosaic Project.
Van Buehlinger with the Hispanic Leaders Group and also Affinia Healthcare, the Affinia Healthcare Foundation, and served on several boards.
And I'm going to interrupt here. She is very humble. Today, Affinia Healthcare partnered with Emerson YMCA, and they had a groundbreaking event. They're building a health center adjacent to the Emerson YMCA in Ferguson. Thanks to Congresswoman Cory Bush. It's about $2 million that they're going to use to build. So thank you so much for being here. I know you had a long day, and I appreciate you being here. Next.
Karen Oresti and Leaders Group, U.S. Attorney's Hate Crimes Task Force and Sequence Task.
Lindsay Corona, an investigator with U.S. Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division.
Eduardo Platon, representing the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce.
He is the executive director. Don't be so shy.
Hi, everybody. Alejandro Santiago, outreach representative for Congresswoman Curtis.
My name is Sandra Now, and I am the president of the Colombian Society.
My name is Oscar Santana.
Sabor colombiano.
And this is my wife, Stella.
My name is Estela, and I'm from Colombia. Represento la comunidad colombiana.
Qué bien, aquí se habla español también.
Sergio Munoz from Bolivia. I work for the Associated General Contractors of Missouri, doing outreach for finding the next generation of construction workers. Paulo Rivera, I'm a teacher at Parkway Schools for Brazil. Thank you.
And see, we have a lot of, I mean, I said we were passionate, but we're also very shy. That gentleman won Teacher of the Year award. He was presented earlier this year at St. Louis County by Dr. Sam Page. I had a chance to talk to him on the phone. He's doing great things besides teaching. He's doing other things. And I think you're doing juvenile mental health also. Yes, see, there's a lot of things beyond our name. There's a lot of things that we do, and we're passionate about our community and the people in our community, and young people, older people, middle-aged people, and broken down knee people. So I thank you for being here, and I thank you guys. Give yourself a hand. Oh, Maria. Jeez. You know I do that every time, right? At least one.
My name is Maria Yaxich. I am from Bolivia. I'm also a member in the scholarship program for the Bolivian Society. I am a board member of the Siblings Hispanic Leaders Group, and I'm a professional realtor that I serve in the area. And I'm also part of the Comunidades Field, an activist organization.
Anybody else? Anybody hiding anywhere? Okay, well, thank you. Give yourselves a big hand of applause for being here. Without further ado, we're going to get on with the program. The title of this program is Employment Discrimination in the Latinx Community. It's presented by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, and the Missouri Commission on Human Rights, MCHR. It's not happening.
I think I need to go there.
There we go. And then I can go on to the next slide. Okay. Ladies first. Dr. Alissa Warren, Executive Director of the Missouri Commission on Human Rights. And her partner tonight, David Davis, St. Louis Deputy Director, District Director of U.S. Equal Employment and Opportunity Commission. And for those that didn't know, thanks to my local senator who nominated me to be on a commission and board, I was appointed by Governor Parson this past April and confirmed by the Senate this past April as your Commissioner on Human Rights for the 1st District of St. Louis. The Missouri Commission on Human Rights was established in 1958 to encourage fair treatment and to foster mutual understanding and respect among all racial and ethnic groups, and to discourage discrimination against any of them. Here's a slide of some of the commissioners that are here now. We still can use some more commissioners if you're in District 2. If you live in District 2, go to the website on commissions and boards and see if you can get on this commission or any other commission that has vacancies. The MCHR mission: to eliminate discrimination through the enforcement of the Missouri Human Rights Act and prevent discrimination through education and outreach. The Missouri Human Rights Act is Chapter 213 of the Revised Statutes of Missouri. The MHARA, or the Missouri Human Rights Act, prohibits discrimination in employment, public accommodation, housing. So it covers a lot of more things which you'll learn tonight other than those, but those are some of the basic things. In fiscal year 21, the Missouri Commission on Human Rights complaints for employment was 835 at 86%. Public accommodations, 104, in housing, 33. Total complaints closed, 972. And I think I went one page beyond. 2 pages beyond? You should have put a stop sign on there.
No,
for
you're
me,
doing a great job.
Because I would
Go
have kept
ahead.
going. Everybody that knows me knows that once I
Yeah.
get talking, I just
You're doing a
keep
great
going.
job. You're doing a great
But
job.
let's welcome Dr. Alissa Warren.
He did a great job. I was just gonna let him keep going, right? I said, you don't even need me here. And Mr. Maldonado is doing a great job. Let's see, where are we? So yeah, we have up on the screen now, just a sort of a breakdown of what the Missouri Human Rights Act covers, which is employment, public accommodations, which is public places like here, where we are tonight, where if you were to come into a place like this and say you couldn't get into the restrooms because of a disability, something like that would be covered under the law for public accommodations, and also housing discrimination, which is an area that we cover as well. So in fiscal year 2021, we did just under 1,000 cases. And I'm gonna go to the next slide. So you wonder, so what all does that mean? What areas does that cover? So the protected categories, which are very similar to what my colleague Dave covers with the federal government, but they're not identical. So they, I think, cover more than what we do. But age is one, and I was talking, right, to Maria about age discrimination earlier tonight. So that is something that's covered under the law. Ancestry, we'll get deeper into that. Disability, national origin. I've got notes, but I never follow them. I should probably stick to my notes, shouldn't I? National origin, race, religion, retaliation, and sex. And believe it or not, and I don't know why it is, and I know it's true for the EEOC too, retaliation seems to be the area that keeps increasing all the time, where you're being treated differently or discriminated against because you filed a discrimination complaint, which really doesn't make people feel safe to file a complaint, but you really need to stand up for your rights. But that number for us is over 60% of our cases are alleging retaliation. So something to be mindful of. Let's look at the breakdown of our complaint statistics. Well, so I got ahead of myself. See, I never follow my slides. 63.5% alleged retaliation. Sex discrimination is really the highest after that, 42%, with almost about 14% of those cases are alleging sexual harassment within that category. Close to 40% is disability. Race has been constant. I've been in this position for about 15, in January will be 15 years, and race has always been around 30%, which I think a lot of times people think that that's all that discrimination laws cover is race, but it's so much more than that. It's also gender and age and national origin and ancestry, which we're going to spend a lot more time talking about, and religion. Religion is protected as well at just under 2%. I'm sorry, just under 3%. Oh, it's Dave's turn. Right? Wait a minute, did I miss something? So I get to do 2 of Dave's slides, right? Since Tony did 2 of mine. I did 2. No, I won't do that. I won't do that. I'll let my colleague Dave Davis come and talk a little bit more about the mission of the EEOC.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I know my voice doesn't carry tremendously, so microphone's always a help. Just a little about me since you all introduced yourselves. Dave Davis, I've been with EEOC now just for a year. Before that, I worked for the state of Missouri for just under 3 years. Before that, I was in private practice as an attorney for over 20 years. Back when I was in law school, I interned with the EEOC and interned with the EEOC back in, what was it, 1996, I guess. And I was an intern for 1 summer and I always wanted to get back. Tell everybody it only took me 25 years, but I made it. So I finally got back to the EEOC. So I'm very excited to be here. Tell everybody it's been like a homecoming. It's amazing that the office has been reconfigured many times, but it still looks pretty similar. So it's been interesting being back, and I very much enjoyed it. I started as a deputy director, and then 6 months later, unfortunately, my predecessor passed away, and since then I have been the acting district director for the St. Louis district. So EEOC, what does the EEOC do? So the EEOC is the key federal agency responsible for ensuring equal employment opportunity by enforcing the federal laws prohibiting employment discrimination against individuals based on certain protected characteristics. And we'll look at those in a minute. So the St. Louis district, one of the things that always comes up is the district. We're kind of like we're basically a region. So we cover more than just St. Louis. So we cover a small section of southern Illinois, the states of Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. And that's the territory that the St. Louis District Office covers. So for example, tomorrow I'll be in Oklahoma, giving a presentation down there. So we have a pretty large area that we cover. So some of the more recent statistics with the EEOC, and we were going with fiscal year 2021 because we haven't finished fiscal year 2022 yet. Our fiscal year ends at the end of September, so those numbers won't be available for a while. But as of the end of fiscal year 2021, you can see the race charges. And then if you go down, you can see the national origin charges. And again, like Dr. Warren said, the retaliation always seems to be kind of on the increase in one of the larger categories for us. Part of that is because you can bring a retaliation claim along with another category. So somebody may bring in a race, a national origin, or a sex claim, and also bring a retaliation claim. So for example, somebody could complain about harassment to their employer, tell them I'm being harassed because of my national origin. And then some action is taken against them by the employer. So they may also bring a retaliation claim as well. So a lot of times they'll go hand in hand. Not always, but a lot of times they do. Right, I will turn it back over to Dr. Warren.
I didn't tell about myself, did I? I'm just gonna let you be mysterious so I can be in the interest of time. But I've been in this position about 15 years, but in government for over 25. So I've been at this for a long time, but only in St. Louis for 10. So I'm a transplant, but it's my second time here. So I came back because I do love this city. So anyway, the overview for national origin is an important one. Sure, so I can turn my notes and also talk at the same time. So what does that essentially mean? It's really based on an individual's place of birth or ancestry, obviously what it sounds like. It could be your country of origin or someplace that you used to live, that would be covered. A geographical region that's associated with a national group. Or it can be based on ethnic groups of people who share a common language, for example, or people who share an ancestry or race or other social characteristics as well. And then finally, too, this is a little more nuanced, but it can be, physical characteristics. It could be linguistics or accents or cultural characteristics that are closely associated with that origin. So if you drill down a little deeper into that, it's also about beliefs or perceptions that individuals have about one's ancestry. And most people come at some point to this country and immigrate to this country and have a country of ancestry and can be discriminated against because of it, which you may have felt in your day-to-day life and your friends and family and neighbors and whatnot. But that's illegal. That's illegal, and it's covered under the Missouri Human Rights Act as well as the federal laws. An association with someone who has who has a particular national origin, such as a parent or a spouse, a fiance, even a child. It doesn't have to be you in particular. It could be someone else you're associated with. And I think a lot of times people don't always necessarily understand or know that. So you can file a complaint based on association in that category as well. And then finally, citizenship status too. And this is an important one because citizenship status is not, we don't base anything that we do on citizenship status or documentation. You don't have to be documented to file a complaint of national origin discrimination with the Missouri Human Rights Commission or the EEOC. That's not anything that we are going to be looking at. It's not something that is it's something that's protected. That citizenship status is not a point that you should be worried about. Now, I think the reality of that though could be, there could be some retaliation in that too. So you have to be, think about what some of the nuances of that can be. I want to talk about what forms that can take. Yeah, and I've got the right slide up there. And it's really, not being hired because of your national origin. You might assume that, well, I'm not hired because they would prefer someone who doesn't have an accent or who doesn't look like me or who, comes from the United States versus an immigrant from another country. That could be, harassment based upon that national origin. I read a lot of really nasty things, and I think I would be surprised at some of the things that I read on the cases, and I know you probably do as well too, Dave. And I'm like, people can be very, very nasty and mean, and based upon some ugly predispositions about a person, rather than looking at the human being and who they are. But it's true, and it happens, and so that's why we're here, because there are protections in place and laws in place that can protect you from that kind of environment. Being fired, or what's called constructive discharge, which is really kind of interesting, where maybe you're not fired, but things are so bad where you work that you're kind of forced to quit, because every day is just really horrible to go to this place to work, and people, treat you bad, or they freeze you out, or they don't talk to you. You just can't take it anymore, and you quit. Constructive discharge. And so that's something that we can cover as well. You might not get those promotions, or you might be demoted because of your national origin or ancestry. Compensation, maybe other people are making more money than you. And I probably in private industry, it's probably harder to know what compensation levels are, but in public service, you can look up everybody's income and see what you're making. So it's a little bit easier to know what compensation levels are in public service, but not so much maybe in private industry. But still, you could find that out and find that maybe others are making more than you, or getting better assignments than you. Maybe the projects that are a little more interesting or a little more high profile might go to others that might not look like you. So those are subtle things that you don't always think about. Or even the terms and conditions of employment might be different as well. Okay. Let me make sure, stop me if I go into your lane, Dave, okay? Because Dave is the attorney, I am not an attorney. So I let him do the legal stuff. But language issues, I sort of talked a little bit about that. And accents are often intertwined with people's perceptions about the fact that you have an accent, so you clearly must come from another country, so therefore it's not English and it doesn't sound like English. So it's a reason for some people, not a legitimate reason, mind you, but it's a reason for people to make assumptions about your ancestry without you having to say it. It's just something that happens. English only rules are also problematic as well, where they might have policies that have been adapted for discriminatory reasons, which we would dig into and investigate. Our investigations are free. There was the young lady that, well, you're an investigator, right? So for the federal government, our investigations, as yours are, I'm sure as well, are not something that we charge citizens for. We also do mediations, which I'll talk about that too. That is another service that is available at no charge. But if policies are applied in a discriminatory manner, we have a policy that we adhere one way for this person, but we're going to treat you differently and interpret that policy differently for another person based on their national origin or ancestry. A problem that happens. Also, too, if policies are not consistent, and that's one of probably the biggest things that we deal with. If they're applied inconsistently, like I said before, then that's problematic and causes issues as well. I'm hitting the wrong buttons here. Okay, so citizenship discrimination, as I said before, violates Title VII, and when it has the purpose and effect of discriminating against national origin in general. The immigration status, as I said before, is not relevant to what we do, and it's really the underlying material facts about the discrimination that are what we are going to look into. Okay, I think I've got to Dave's part. He's going to talk a little bit more about the impact of COVID, which you guys are just coming back from 3 years of being away from each other in real life. So Dave's going to talk a little bit more about the pandemic and equal opportunities in the Latinx community. Dave, take it away.
All right, so we're talk just a little bit about caregiver discrimination. So folks who are caring for someone at home, and it can apply in whether it's COVID or other reasons. Generally, somebody for care employees don't have the right to a reasonable accommodation when it comes to providing care for someone at home. The Americans with Disabilities Act allows for reasonable accommodations for the employee to do the essential functions of their job. But a lot of employers grant time off for individuals to take care of folks at home, whether it's a sick child, it could be a parent, whoever, spouse. And if the employer does have a policy or a practice, so it may not be in writing, but they may just have a practice where they allow people time off to take their kid to the doctor, take their mom to the doctor, to stay home with their spouse who's ill, then they have to apply that policy or practice equally to all individuals, regardless of any of their protected statuses. So they can't say, you know, we let somebody off to take care of their mom, but not let someone else off to take care of their disabled child or take care of their spouse who is a different race, anything like that. If they start to make those sorts of distinctions based on a protected characteristic, that's something that's protected. There can also be harassment of caregivers, things like making comments about a woman who is at work instead of at home taking care of the kids who were at home from school when all the schools were closed, or any of those sorts of things. When they're making comments to somebody based on a perception that an individual, because of their characteristics, should act a certain way. If those are the comments that are being made, that can be considered harassment under the law. So if you need more information about the caregiver, there's a link in slides on our website. All right, so moving into COVID as a disability. I know we're moving kind of quick, but we don't have a ton of time, so trying to move it through. So is COVID-19 a disability? And I'll give you the usual lawyer answer, which is it depends. Whenever I've taught class, it's always what I would tell my students. That's always the answer. It depends. Yes. So in some cases, it can be a disability, but you have to look at the ADA and determine whether or not it's a disability under the ADA. So you have to look at whether or not it's going to be an impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. If it is, then it is a disability under ADA, regardless of what the underlying condition is. You're looking for an impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. If that occurs, there's protection under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So one of the ways we're seeing this more often now is with regard to the long COVID, where people continue to have effects from COVID weeks, months, longer down the road. So that's when you can have it as a disability. If it's just somebody who has the mild symptoms, they have a cold-like symptoms for a week, and then they're back at work, that wasn't a disability. So it depends on whether the impact it has on their major life activities. So when you're talking about ADA accommodations requests, you're looking at all the usual rules under the ADA, whether it's COVID or anything else. So you're looking at whether or not the employer has the right to, or has the obligation to engage in a conversation with the employee. If the employee says, I have a disability, it affects my ability to perform some of the essential functions, but I can perform those essential functions if I have a reasonable accommodation. The employee can suggest a reasonable accommodation, but the employer is not required to go along with and implement that reasonable accommodation just because it's what the employee wants. But they're required to have a conversation with the employee because there may be reasons why that accommodation that the employee wants is not going to work for that employer or for that specific job. But they have to have that conversation. And then they can look at what's a reasonable accommodation. And as long as it's not going to pose an undue hardship on the employer, they should be implementing a reasonable accommodation. So one of the things to make sure that folks understand, I think sometimes employees think that I suggest a reasonable accommodation, the employer has to do that. The employer is not required to do that, but what they do provide has to be a reasonable accommodation. One of the places that you can always look to come up Job Accommodation Network. If you go and look at their website, you can put in various disabilities or conditions, and it'll give suggestions for potential reasonable accommodations. I always suggest it's a great place to work both for employees and employers to go and see what's suggested. One of the things to remember is that the employer is not required to eliminate or to modify essential job functions. So the employee is required to do the essential job functions with the reasonable accommodation. So one of the examples I always gave with my students was employer hires someone to come in and their job is to print letters on company letterhead. So they have to print the letters on the company letterhead. Well, this individual happens to use a wheelchair. So they come into work and we store the letterhead on the top shelf as high as we can store it. Well, this individual can't reach the top shelf. Well, reaching up to the top shelf isn't the essential function of the job. The essential function of the job is printing the letters on that letterhead. So reasonable accommodation can be relocating that letterhead to a different shelf. It's a pretty simple example, but that just kind of shows what we're talking about. But a reasonable accommodation would not be saying, I can't print the letters on the letterhead because it's up there, so I'm not going to do it. And that's what the employee is asking for. The employer doesn't have to modify the essential functions of the job. They don't have to change the job. They have to give a reasonable accommodation to allow them to perform those essential functions of the job. So that would be an example of something the employer wouldn't have to do if it was requested by the employer. So one of the hot topics now is with regard to return to the office and continuing telework. A lot of folks like working at home, especially with gas prices like they are now. Somebody who goes to the office every day, I know, it's painful. So you have to look at it again, just like you do with everything else under the ADA. First, you have to determine whether or not the employee has a disability. Just because the person likes to work at home doesn't mean that they get a reasonable accommodation. They have to be entitled to it under the law first, which means they have to have a disability. So if the person has a disability, then you have to look at whether or not it's a reasonable accommodation. Some employers modified folks' jobs when they went home, just because with the pandemic, we were trying to get everybody home. So they may have changed or moved duties around from different people, and so someone may not be doing everything they were when they were in the office while they're at home. If we're now saying you need to come back into the office, if that's what the employer is saying, then we have to look and see, can you do everything at home? If you can, and the person has a disability, and this could be a reasonable accommodation, and you have to look at how has it been working out with them at home. They've been at home for 2+ years at this point. Are they able to perform all the work at home? Are they doing the work from home? Are they able to actually make it happen, get it done? If they are, then they may be eligible for that reasonable accommodation. But you can look at all of those things as the employer when you're making that decision. Right, so COVID resources, more resources on our website, of course. Human trafficking. One of the things I want to make clear is that we are not a criminal law enforcement agency. We can't go out and arrest somebody and haul them off to jail. That's not what we do. Our agency's mission and what we are limited to is when it comes to employment. So how does that come into play when we're dealing with human trafficking? We can't stop it from happening. We can't arrest the person who's done it. But what we can do is if an individual is forced into a human trafficking situation where they're being required to work against their will, for example, or they have horrible conditions going on, they're being sexually harassed, whatever it may be, we can get involved in those situations and we may be able to help them stop it from happening with the employer, and we can help them get compensation. So the individual might be able to recover for the harm that they suffered. That's not something they can get from the law enforcement side. They're not going to go and get them compensation or help them get compensation. They're going to arrest the person who was doing it and put them in jail. So it's two very different things, just so we're clear as to what we can and cannot do, because I think sometimes there's some confusion as to what we can do. So just a little bit of kind of what is human trafficking? So human trafficking, there's a difference between smuggling and human trafficking. So the smuggling can be somebody's coming across the border illegally. They may pay somebody to help them to smuggle them across the border, but once they're across the border, that's it. Off they go, they're on their own. Or they may have set them up with an employer, but once they get to that employer, they can decide to stay at that employer or they can decide to go. Human trafficking is when the person doesn't consent. Either the person is being taken from someplace, which is possible, that they didn't consent to being taken to where they're going, or even if they consented, once they get there, they're set in a situation where they're not permitted to leave. And it can happen both to legal residents, undocumented, or US citizens. It can happen in any of those sorts of situations. It isn't specific. One of the areas it tends to happen is with vulnerable populations. So if folks lack employment choices, lack economic bargaining power, if they're not familiar with the labor and employment laws of the country, of the United States. So what we do is we regulate the employers. So employers are required to comply with certain laws. That's one of their obligations for the privilege of conducting business in the United States. So if they're conducting business in the United States, they have to follow the law. And as Dr. Warren said, it doesn't matter whether the person is legally in the country or not, whether the person is documented or not, as far as our agencies are concerned. All we're looking at is, are the employers following the law and how they are to handle and treat their employees? If they're not, then that's when we get involved. We're not going to ask when somebody calls us and we're taking charges of discrimination and doing an investigation. We're not asking questions about their immigration status. That's irrelevant for what we do. So it's not a question that we're going to ask. As Dr. Warren said, it may come up. So folks have to understand that it may come up, but that shouldn't be a reason to to not come forward, because it's not something that we are going to ask. So some of the things that some of the signs of the human trafficking, it can be the use of force against folks. It could be fraud. So making claims of, if you come and work for us, we're going to pay you a bunch of money, or we're going to put you up in nice housing. And those sorts of things don't happen. It can be the coercion, the threats. It could be once you get here, we need to keep your documentation. So the person could be legally here, but that employer takes the documentation and won't give the documentation back, which then basically keeps the person in that spot. And so they're not permitted that freedom to go someplace else. So with the human trafficking ways that employers can control folks, it's going to be things like isolation from the public. You can see it like in the farming community, where it's more rural. The individuals are isolated on that property. They may be provided with housing on that property. They're provided with food on that property, hopefully. And the quality of all that can be problematic as well at times. It can be threats, like they're going to shame the victim, something bad happened to the individual, they were a victim of sexual harassment. If you leave, if you report this, we're going to tell everybody what you did. It's not going to be what they did, it's what you did. And so that type of thing can happen. And that can be those sorts of threats to try and keep people there. It can be the financial control, keeping the personal liberties, you can't leave the property, there's no transportation, there's no place, you can't get it. So it's those sorts of things can happen. And when we look at the makeup of the workforce for the Latinx community, women make up 40% of the immigrant workforce. And women make up 44% of the low-wage foreign-born labor force. Crop production, Hispanic women are at 18%. And the largest percentage of that is Hispanics at 61%. You can see that 90% of female farm workers reported sexual harassment on the job as a major problem. So that's why it's important to looking at the number of women who are part of that workforce. And sexual harassment is a large problem.
The 500,000 is female Latinas? Third bullet.
I believe so.
So I think to clarify that bullet point is every year an estimated 500,000 women work in the US fields. So the 500,000 women are just, as it says, women, or 500,000 Latina women work in the US fields. I think that's the question.
Yeah,
It is.
Yeah.
I don't recall where I got that number from, quite honestly.
The assumption is that
It's probably
because
all,
it doesn't clarify, it's
Right.
just women.
correct.
Yeah, because that is female Latino workers.
Yeah, but of that 500,000, 61.8% are Indian descent.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's going to be the majority of that number still. One thing to keep in mind is the U visa, which is not something that we do, obviously. Again, that's another agency that handles that. But that's a potential for victims of crimes. So if an individual has been a victim of a qualifying crime, suffered mental or physical abuse, and they have information regarding criminal activity and they're willing to assist the government, then they may be eligible for a U visa. So this can come up in our cases when it's related to sexual harassment in particular. If somebody has suffered physical abuse, they're likely to qualify for U visas, but it's something to keep.
I'm getting my exercise. I'm gonna try to do it without my notes. How's this? So we'll see how this goes. So we've got a lot of great information from Dave tonight. Some specific details about employment discrimination. And so I want to talk a little bit about how do you file a complaint, so this happens, and it does, and we wish it didn't. We wish we didn't have to do this work, although I'm glad we do this work, and I'm proud to do this work, and I'm happy that we're here to be supportive and to give you information so that you can bring that back to your organizations. You all represent a tremendous, I was just in awe as you did your introductions about all of the different organizations that you represent. So please take this information back to your collective organizations and share that. And when we get to the end, I'll talk to you about how we can come and talk to your other groups too, if you would like. But how do you file a complaint, basically? So if you feel like you have been discriminated against, or anything that we've talked about sounds like, I'm seeing this happen, I think I need to call Alissa and see what's going on. You can do that at no charge. It has to have happened within 180 days of that discriminatory act, right? So 6 months. So if it's 181 days, you're out of luck with us, with the Missouri Commission on Human Rights, but you're not. And Dave will talk about that. You get more time with the federal government, but with the state, we have a 6-month window from the time that, say, you were harassed at work because of your national origin. And it's a hard thing. I've been sexually harassed before, and it's painful, and it's scary, and you don't sometimes want to talk about it, and you have to kind of get your mind around what happened to you. And did they really just say that to me? Are they really treating me like this? I just want to work. I just want to do my job. I just want to be respected in my workplace. And so it takes people some time to get to the point that they can pick up the phone and call us, or they can get online and file a complaint. So that's one of the ways. Let me talk about how you can do that. So if you file your complaint with the Missouri Commission on Human Rights and you want to take that all the way into court, you would end up in state court, where if you file with the EEOC, you would end up in federal court. So that's one difference between the two of us, but they're duly filed too. So if you file with Dave, we're also going to get that case, right? We work together. I mean, this is just not the dog and pony show tonight. We always work together. right? So we know about what's going on at EEOC and vice versa. So you don't have to run around and file in two places. It used to be back in the day where you'd have to file all over, you know, with the city and with the state and with the feds. You don't have to do that because we talk to each other and we have that information. So it's kind of a one-stop there, which is a good thing. So let me talk about what that process looks like. It basically, if you go to our website or come into the office here in St. Louis, you can walk in. We're on 7th Street in the Wainwright Building downtown. You could walk in and file a complaint, but you'll fill out what's called the discrimination complaint assessment form. We're going to essentially look at that and decide whether or not we have jurisdiction. You know, a lot of times it might be a labor standards issue, right? Or it might be a work comp issue, something that we just don't cover. Not that we don't want to help you, but we'll tell you where you can get help, but we don't always have jurisdiction over everything. And we get a lot of times people are confused by that. So the assessment helps you kind of figure out whether or not we have jurisdiction. If we do, then you can fill out a complaint intake questionnaire, and an intake specialist can help an individual fill that out. We can do it by phone, you can do it online, you can come in person, and we do have some Spanish speaking investigators. And this, I'm proud of this, I just have to say, I've been here 15 years, and one of the things I just insisted on, because when I came, we did not have any. And now I think we have 3. Let's see, one in St. Louis, one in Jefferson City, and one in Kansas City. So we used to have 0. So now, you know, so then when you call, there will be someone there who can speak the language as well. So that's a good thing. Plus, we also have a service that we use. It's like a translation service. So that way you can always get help. So don't be afraid of any language barriers, or let folks know that that is not going to stop us from helping. And the process then begins. So go out on our website and take a look around and see what the process looks like. There's a flow chart that kind of explains it. And I love the EEOC's website. There's some great stuff out there too. So I would recommend you look at Dave's website as well. I'm probably stealing your thunder, right? But sorry. And then let's see, is this, oh, this is yours, I did. So this is Dave's. I want to be mindful of time too, because we have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, right? And we want to have some time for questions. And Tony has a couple of questions kind of in the can, or we can just open it up to the floor too.
Yeah.
So Dave, do you want to talk just briefly about your filing complaint process and how that works? They have a little bit more sophisticated website than we do, so I kind of wish we had theirs, but.
Sure. So just very quickly, there's a lot of ways you can contact us. One of the easiest ways to start the charge process is by going to our public portal. If you go to the public portal, you can create an account there, and then you can go through the question that's going to ask you about the information that we're going to need to get the process started. From there, you'll be asked to schedule an intake interview. You'll schedule an interview with one of our investigators who will meet with you, talk to you about the case, prepare the charge of discrimination, send it to you for your signature. That can all be done through the portal. If folks don't have access to the internet, they can always call the 1-800 number. They can call the local office. We'd be happy to talk to them if they just call the office as well. One thing right now, we are not open to the public. We are still closed to the public with the pandemic. So folks can't just walk into our office yet. You can walk into Elissa's office, but
We've
not
been
ours.
in the office for over a year, so. I wish we were, but.
You can file by mail as well. One of the things to be aware of is with us and with you to an extent too, there's a difference between the charge of discrimination and the inquiry. A lot of folks get confused with us about the inquiry versus the charge. The inquiry is just getting information to us, and basically is to see, like Alissa said, can we help you? Are you in the right place? Then once we get that, then we determine if you're in the right place. We do the interview, we draft the charge, and send the charge to the individual to sign. You have to have that signed charge in order to have a charge of discrimination that meets all of the standards for all of our laws. And we're the same way, so we have to have those signed charges. So just by going online and starting that process does not mean you file the charge. You have to go through the whole process and complete it. The charges are dual filed. For most of our laws, it's 300 days. But if you're looking to protect your rights under both laws, you need to make sure that that charge is signed within that 180 days. And then you'll protect your rights under both the federal law and under the state law. Okay, so if folks sign it within that 180 days, then they're good. If someone wants to file by mail, they can file by mail, but it needs to have certain specific information and it has to be signed. If it has the specific information that's on the slide and it's signed, we can treat that as a charge of discrimination. It doesn't have to be on our form, but it has to have that information for the courts to say that, yes, this is a charge of discrimination. We already talked about the inquiry versus the charge, and the time limit, the 180 versus the 300. All right, do we want to go through our resources, or do we want to?
Let's ask, I think you want to open it up for questions, Tony? Yeah, I think so.
We have about 9 minutes left, and I promised this young lady that you can say something about your organization, some of the job openings.
Yeah, but they closed on the 7th, so it was
Oh, okay.
bilingual. So, I mean, we do a lot of the same things that kind of overlap. So the Family Medical Leave Act overlaps kind of with the ADA and the EEOC, what the EEOC does. We're also in charge of enforcing the H2A program. So we do, I think, I don't know exactly what you guys do with the H2A program, but I was under the impression that we kind of enforce the program and make sure that employers are following it, paying people properly, housing them in good conditions, things like that. I did want to ask you about your investigations and what exactly that entails, because like when we do investigations for things, we go into employers' businesses, we sit down and talk to them, we review payroll and time records, we talk to employees, interview employees, and take a tour of the establishment. And if there's anything, like if somebody didn't get paid overtime properly or minimum wage, we would do our calculations and meet with the employer. But workers oftentimes get very nervous coming to the government, number one. And then number two, when we go in there, it causes kind of a uproar. So I was just wondering what your investigative process is.
It can vary. We do some on sites where we would go to the employer like that, but it's probably more rare for us than it is for you. A lot of ours is done where we'll send out a request for information, and we'll get policies and procedures, and we'll get personnel records, and we're looking at the individual who's made the complaint as well as other similar individuals and how they were treated. And the individual may identify those folks, or we may ask more broadly to get that information. So we can get that information and we can start reviewing that. We also do interviews. We've done more of those probably virtually, like the rest of the world more recently, but we can interview employees, we can interview managers, we can interview others with the employer. And so we can collect information that way. We can go out and we can do on-site investigations. We've got a couple now, we're probably about to head out. But we'll show up at the employer and say, okay, we're here, here's what we want to see. Usually we give them a heads up that we're coming, so we don't cause quite as much as much stress on the employer. They know we're coming, they know what we're looking for, and that we make sure that we're going to the right spot.
And then so typically are your investigations or are allegations substantiated through the interview process and then also the information that you're getting from the employer? I guess my question is, how do you substantiate, or how does a complainant know how they can substantiate their allegation?
Yeah, just the overview of our process. So we get the charge, we've interviewed the person, we take their charge, and then from there, we can send out usually after that, we ask the employer to provide us with a position statement to tell us, we've got the employee side of the story, let's hear your side of the story. Once we get that position statement in, then we'll talk to usually the employee again. And say, okay, here's what the employer says. What is your response to that? See what they have to say to that, and then we can collect information. The employer is not required to give us a position statement. What they are required to do is respond to our request for information. So if we send out that request for information, if they ignore it, which happens at times, we can then serve them with a subpoena. We serve them a subpoena, they don't respond to that, then we end up in federal court. And the judge gets to decide whether or not we get that information.
Same for us.
Yeah. So that's kind of how our process works. And then we can also do interviews of others as well, other than just the charging party. And we look through all that information and decide whether it's likely that there was discrimination. We don't have the same standards as the courts do. We're looking at whether it's likely or not, and from there we can decide whether we're going to pursue litigation. We have the ability to pursue litigation with the EEOC. Individuals can also request their right to sue, or if we decide we're not going to pursue it, we'll issue a right to sue. And a lot of times we'll have attorneys who will file charges who's representing someone. They're going to request that right to sue, and they're going to take it to court. So there's a lot of different methods.
Anybody else has a question?
I do. Out of 972 complaints in 2021, what is the outcome after the investigation? What happens?
For the Missouri Commission on Human Rights, that FY 2021, it basically depends on the case. Typically, we're going to issue a, whether it's been a probable cause or no probable cause finding based upon the information on interviewing witnesses and that sort of thing, and also respondents. And some will come with attorneys, some will not. You don't have to have an attorney in this process. We'll mediate a lot of those cases as well to try and find a win-win solution for both sides, if we can do that. And that's become pretty popular, actually. People we have, I think, a waiting list right now, about 100 that want to get into mediation, and that's done virtually right now. And people tend to want to do it virtually more so than they used to come into the office, and we'd separate the parties and do it in different conference rooms and go at it that way. But for some people also want to just get their finding and then lawyer up and go into court too. So after 180 days, the law allows us to then, we used to be able to do it before 180 days, but the law changed in 2017. So we now have to wait 180 days before we can issue that right to sue. And then you take that letter of right to sue and you can go into court with that. And at that point, we're done with that process. You'd have to get your own lawyer and go into court, but you have a probable cause finding, so that's a good thing. It's probably, by the time cases get to that point, about probably 50% of our cases have either settled or found no probable cause, or there's been other sort of like non-jurisdictional determination. And so it's the other half that then will want to either proceed into court or not, or try to settle. But the percentage on that, it's not a high percentage of those that go into court. It's pretty limited, actually.
It's pretty much a financial arrangement.
Well, I don't know if I like that terminology, a financial arrangement.
It's usually more than that, because
Yeah.
because we're representing the federal government. We're representing the public interest. They're representing the citizens of Missouri. So we're not just representing the individual who comes in. So in most of our resolutions where we resolve a case, we're not just looking for money for the individual. We're also looking for changes to policies and practices. We're looking for training and education. And we're trying to get all of that prevented from happening in the future. So it isn't just about this one individual and getting them compensation for what happened to them. It's also about making those other changes to make a change at that employer so that they understand the law, so that going forward, it doesn't happen to somebody else. So that's one of the things that I think that we can get as our agencies that they're not necessarily going to get if they go to court on their own. If they just hire a lawyer and go to court, they're going to go to court, probably going to settle before they ever get to court. And it's all going to be about money in those cases. They're not going to seek any of that other sort of relief that we are going to insist on in order to settle in cases.
Out of the 972 complaints, any lawyer has been convicted and went to jail?
Any lawyer? Oh, employer? I don't believe so.
Yeah, there's
No, because that's not, we're not looking at criminal cases where we would send a lawyer to jail, an employer to jail. We're looking at, like Dave said, a change in policy, something that's more inclusive, or looking at, equal pay issues, and there's some standards that could change that would be better for all of the employees. And, maybe there's some remedy for the one employee that maybe was not being paid fairly, or that didn't get the promotion, or some training that needs to be done. So we look at trying to do that as well, which was a resource I was going to talk about, but we do come and work with organizations to provide training. And there's a lot of companies, we just come back every year and talk to all their workforce about what the law says and about what the responsibilities are of the employer and the employees, because you need to know your rights in order to protect your rights.
And I'm sorry, our time is up. I know, just when we were
3
getting
minutes over.
to have this,
No.
one-on-one with the people. So remember, you guys, you can contact
We got our cards up here.
both offices if you think you would like them to readdress your group.
Yeah.
If you individually, like the chamber or the group from the Colombian group, or, your spouse's group, or anything like that, or the Bolivian Society, by all means, get that, Google them if you didn't already write down their address. But,
Grab the card and check.
and cards are here, and I'm available also to navigate. So thank you very much for coming tonight. One last plug I got to put in. September 30th is our Premio Esperanza. And we will be sending out save the dates or information about the Premio Esperanza. It is September 30th at the Missouri Athletic Club. And I'm happy to say that we will be again at Missouri Club. And again, we already have interest from a lot of our collaborators. They're going to be there. It's going to be a very diverse group of people, a very diverse group of leaders and civic leaders. And thank you. So look out for that information. Premio Esperanza, September 30th. And let's give them a big.
Let me just take a picture of you three.
Oh, yes, would you take it with my phone too?
Yeah, yes, definitely.
Let me go.
Yeah. Put the rose in the middle and the thorns on the side.
Ah. Let me get my phone ready. I want to.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Board of Directors of the college.
Right here?
Plus it's light here, it's kind of dark.
Okay, all right.
How about all the boards? Yeah.